King represents Iowa's 5th District, where he serves as a Republican. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about the vote yesterday. The House went ahead and passed a 3-week extension of the budget, the CR, that now goes to the Senate. We'll see what happens there this week, but it is expected to pass and go through. You voted against it. You're one of about 50, I believe it was 54 in total, Republicans to vote no. Why?
Well, I stood up and said why in conference a week ago, and I had voted no on the previous CR. There were only 6 Republicans that voted no a couple of weeks ago on the 2-week continuing resolution. And I said that I will vote no on any continuing resolution that does not cut off funding to Obamacare. And I would include into that as an added component is the funding that goes on forward to Planned Parenthood. I'm committed to cutting off the funding to Planned Parenthood as well. And as I see this, the leverage has been this, that every Republican has now voted to repeal Obamacare in the House and in the Senate. And it was bipartisan in the House. So we need to find a place where there's enough leverage to shut off this funding. There are $105.5 billion in automatic spending that has been written into Obamacare. And as far as the scope is concerned, it's completely unprecedented. And so we have to, as an obligation, shut that funding off. The only 2 leverage points that I can see in the entire 112th Congress are the leverage points that would be the continuing resolution that funds this government for the balance of the fiscal year until September 30th, or the debt ceiling bill. Those 2 things. And as we pledge to repeal Obamacare and defund Obamacare, we have to use the tools that are at our disposal, and that's the continuing resolution. That's why I took a stand. The vote went from only 6 that voted no a couple of weeks ago to 54 Republicans that voted no yesterday. I think that makes a statement, and we'll see now how things unfold in the next 3 weeks, Libby.
As you said, 54 Republicans voted against it, 186 voted for it, and House leadership among the Republicans was encouraging a yes vote. What does this say about Republican leadership?
Well, leadership has, they need to be complimented for the challenge that they have tackled and the things that they've accomplished. And I gave a floor speech last night after the vote, complimenting Speaker Boehner on bringing this House back to regular order. The House was really, it devolved into the situation where it was, I think, by definition, dysfunctional. We didn't have a budget that was passed by the House. We didn't have appropriations bills passed by the House. The government was being run by stopgap measures of continuing resolutions, which is what we got handed in December of last year that funded the government till March 4th. John Boehner said we're going to regular order. He brought H.R. 1, the big continuing resolution bill, up before the House that debated all of the spending of the entire federal government under an open rule. So it had hundreds of amendments and it had hundreds of votes, and members had finally a chance, after 4 years of accumulated frustration between Democrats and Republicans, a chance to debate the issues that they care so much about. So John Boehner's putting this House back on track, functioning the way it was envisioned by the language in the Constitution and our founding fathers. It's a tough job. There are going to be a little bit of tension along the way. It's very natural, but he understands how the House works. And in the end, I think you're going to see a smooth-running Republican conference.
House Speaker Boehner said this is a small down payment on our commitment to the American people that we'd have real fiscal responsibility. What's your reaction to that statement? And if you're a no vote, how does that tally you up with that?
Well, there's a loaf of bread of the cuts here. There was $62 billion that were passed in H.R. 1, the large continuing resolution. And now, having continuing resolutions that are 2 weeks, now 3 weeks, it's a slice out of that loaf, or a slice and a half out of that loaf, however you want to define it. And roughly a slice a week might be one way to look at it, $2 billion a week. That is progress, but I also look back and see that in order to pass the extension for 2 years of the Bush tax brackets last fall, we had to do at least $212 billion in transfer payments, most of which went to extending unemployment benefits to 99 weeks. And that $212 billion wasn't much debated, but it was part of the price of getting the tax brackets extended. I think that the freshman class didn't live through that experience, so the focus on $62 billion is a higher priority in the minds of a lot of the members of the Republican conference than I believe it is. I think the highest priority is shutting off the funding to Obamacare because it's been found unconstitutional by 2 federal courts. It's been rejected by the American people. The polling says so. The election on November 2nd says so. And I'm determined to act on that and see the day that it's finally pulled out of the code.
And you've said you're willing to see a government shutdown rather than continue to fund the health care law.
Well, and I've said it in perhaps a little bit different way, in that the House is determined and committed, and I think you can see it by three actions of the House: H.R. 1, the CR, the 2-week continuing resolution, and then the vote yesterday. The House, especially the House leadership, is determined to provide the resources for the federal government to function in a legitimate, fiscally responsible fashion. It would be, if there's a shutdown, it would be delivered by Harry Reid as a proxy for President Obama. And so I'm willing to face that, because if we are not willing to face a shutdown that would be a result of the actions of the Senate and the White House, if we aren't willing to face that, then the President will get exactly everything that he's willing to fight for. That would include Obamacare, that would include funding Planned Parenthood, and that would not include cuts that go very much beyond where we are right now.
Congressman Steve King of Iowa. Let's get to the phones. Jacksonville, Florida. Thomas joins us on the Republicans line.
Yes, good morning.
Good
Morning, Thomas.
Yeah, I've been watching Mr. King there, and we just want to tell him to keep up the good work there. Don't slack up. Don't trust them Democrats a bit. And did Bonner ask Pelosi for the key to that bipartisan room? You know, the one you lock the door when you go in there for a bipartisan bill?
You know, Thomas, I like the way you phrased that. And I was never let inside that room, so I would have no idea what that looks like. But I hope that there is a key to it, and I hope that Speaker Boehner has that, and we can carry on with bipartisan dialogue. But I will say this, that there's a completely different tone here in this Congress. And it's now, I mean, John Boehner is a fiscal conservative. He is a social conservative, and he understands how the House is to work, and he has about 244 Republicans that he's got to keep on the team. So it's a harder job that he has than the job that I have. But I think that you're going to see more bipartisan effort that's here, and it will be mostly working, I think, with Blue Dog Democrats and those conservative Democrats that have more of a common philosophy.
CQ Weekly has a piece called $100 billion from where? And they talk about how since last fall, House Republicans have been on a mission to cut $100 billion in federal spending. But the context is elusive, with different speakers defining the circumstances to suit their own preferences. Where does the $100 billion come from?
Well, we've already demonstrated where the $62 billion comes from. And
is that a goal that you have, $100 billion? Is that...
You know, if they put that out on the table, I'm very likely to vote for that. I personally have been focused on the Obamacare issue and some of the other large issues that are being funded by the federal government that I believe should not be.
And are you seeing things outside of that $60 billion of cuts in H.R. 1 that you think should also be thrown in there, too? Think more things should be on the table.
I don't know that I'm prepared to give a public list of those things, because as soon as you put that list out, the constituency base rises up to defend their funding stream. And so when you do make such a proposal, one should actually be dug in and prepared to defend it. And but I will say this. We've already found $105.5 billion. That's the automatic spending in Obamacare. That's a pretty easy one to go get. And then as we move forward on this, we'll take a look at all of these budgets. And it's actually, if I were to say it's premature, the appropriations subcommittees need to work their will. They need to look through, listen to testimony, examine all the components of the budget. I think they should go back to zero baseline budgeting and evaluate every program that we have. Through that process, the people on the subcommittees especially have significant expertise in all this subject matter. And I think they're going to produce, under Hal Rogers, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, some serious cuts to get this government back functioning correctly again.
One of our followers on Twitter, called Forums for Justice, writes that 60-some billions in cuts out of the deficit is a proverbial drop in the bucket, and asks, where's the beef, John Boehner? So is there friction here between the Tea Party caucus, conservative members of the Republican Party, and the leadership?
Well, I'm going to say it depends on how you define the word friction. I've seen more, and I've seen it more intense than it is now. There's a certain tension that's there, because there's an agenda that's being driven by leadership, and then there's perhaps a more conservative agenda that's being driven by a core of more conservative people within the House of Representatives. But it's not a personality tension. It's not a personal hard feelings tension. It's more just, you know, if you sit around a family table and somebody wants a Buick and somebody else wants a Cadillac, there's a little friction there, and you get it resolved. We'll get this resolved, but we're not buying Buicks or Cadillacs. We're going to take this government back down down to the legitimate functions of government, and we'll do it together. And this is the kind of dialogue we have to have. Some of it's inside the conference, some of it's in committee, some of it's one-on-one, and some of it's the discussion that goes on through the media. It's just the way this world works.
Jane, Democratic caller in New Jersey, welcome.
Morning, Jane.
Hi, Jane, are you with us? I think she may have left. Let's go to St. Pete, Florida. Dave, Independent Line. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Hi there.
Morning, Dave.
Hey, all right. Apparently, we got a conflict of interest in our Congress. One party's bent on globalization, and the other part's bent on profit without pensions. That's why the health care's in the crapper. Everybody's working 35 years in the private sector. They have no pensions. They get used up and cast out on unemployment. Then you got the government employees. They all got pensions. They all got health care. You got the union workers. They all got pensions. They all got health care. But the rest of us are forced into, charitable hospitalization and health care? Come on. You got the lobbyists giving you guys suitcases of money. Hey, let's reevaluate the way you guys get elected, and go online and find your job.
Well, Dave, first, I've spent my life in the private sector. I started a construction business in 1975. I had a negative net worth of $5,000, and I went out and bought an old beaten-up bulldozer and welded on it for 2 weeks before I could put it to work and start to earn its first dollar. I'm at payroll for over 28 and a half years, and when I came here to this Congress, I sold that business to my oldest son, and he's operating it now. No one handed me anything. I did earn it, and I do see, though, the point that you make, that government employees have more secure jobs and usually a better benefits plan than there is in the private sector. And it's true that unions have a better benefits plan than generally is in the balance of the private sector. I'd like to see our public employees, and to the extent that the union contracts could be negotiated that way, I think it's prudent to turn these benefit packages, especially the retirement plans, into defined contribution plans rather than defined benefit plans, because the promises that are out there cannot be kept. But if you tie it to the contributions, and if the employer's putting their share in, that contribution should grow. But you should use the money that's there, not the money that someone else is going to earn for the pension plan. And then with the balance of this, there are people who didn't turn out very well when they arrived at retirement. That has been the case for a long time. And I'd like to see this be a nation that people could save their own retirement plans and put some incentives in place. And I'll keep working on that issue, because I think you make a point that all of us in Congress should listen to.
There's a story in today's Washington Post coming to us from the McClatchy Tribune services. With pension plans under attack, Congress's own benefits are hefty. Lawmakers can retire to generous packages with less buy-in.
The response for that, I guess, is what you're wanting. The packages that we have today are not the packages that many people think we have. And I believe it's 5 years to be vested in a retirement plan at all. The federal employees that make a career out of this, their plan is one that accumulates over the working career of their lifetimes. And the average time here in Congress, as I recall, and I'd have to go back and double check this to tell you I know it's fact today, is about 10.8 years time in Congress. So the pension plans for an average member of Congress aren't that great. The health care plan that's here, we contribute to that in the same fashion that other federal employees do. There's still the virus of the rumor that's been going on since the 80s that says that members don't contribute to Social Security. Well, we do. We have done so since the 80s, and we're on the same plan as the other federal employees. So it's not that great, and if I were going to retire off of what's here, and this is by the beginning of my 9th year, it would be pretty slim pickings indeed, and probably Dave and I would be in the same place. And by the way, that suitcase full of money really doesn't come my way. It's pretty hard to raise enough money to do the minimal ads to get reelected to this Congress where I come from, but it's not the case for everybody. Thanks, Libby.
Congressman Steve King represents Iowa's 5th District, which includes Storm Lake, Sioux City, and Council Bluffs. He sits on the Agriculture Committee, also Small Business, and the Judiciary. Let's hear from Richard, Republican, down in Texas. Hi there.
Hello.
Good morning.
Thank you for C-SPAN. Congressman, it's obvious that Congress is having a difficult time passing budgets and is in a habit of spending. I think we just need a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget and take it away from you all and force you into fiscal responsibility. What are your comments?
Well, I just agree with you. If we had the kind of fence built around us that we have in most of, or probably all of the states to requiring a balanced budget, then I've been through that process. I spent 6 years in the Iowa Senate, and we brought that budget into balance because we had to. And I think that's the real only solution here for this Congress. The pendulum swings both ways on who's in the majority and the particular philosophies and spending priorities. Congressman Bob Goodlatte of Virginia has brought the constitutional amendment for a balanced budget each year that I've been here and recall, and I've been an original co-sponsor on that constitutional amendment. He's working it again this year. I give him great credit for that, and I continue to help him with it, and I hope more members sign on to it and we can get a vote on the constitutional amendment for a balanced budget and move it over to the Senate. It came very close to passing in the mid-90s, and it has an opportunity in this environment too. So I'm glad you bring it up. That's what Congress needs to do, and I certainly support it.
Another Texan, this time from Fort Worth. Susan is a Democratic caller. Hi there.
Hi. Well, you know, if these new clowns, particularly in the House of Representatives, had started in on their own salaries and benefits, shut down your little clinic there with the doctor, shut down your cafeteria, do some other things. The reason the private sector doesn't have pensions is the Republicans many, many years ago fixed it so that these big corporations could use those pension funds to use as working capital in their businesses. So that did away with that, and now the people are stuck with these worthless 401 things. And, now they're going after the public sector, the teachers and everything else. It's just absolutely disgusting. You're going after health care for everybody. Who cares about the little people? You all sure don't.
Well, first of all, I pay for the visits that I make to the doctor here in the Capitol, and with all of the people we have around here, we need to have health care available to the thousands of people that are right here on the Capitol. The cafeterias, they charge a bill when you buy the food down there, and I presume their budget is close to balance, although they could be in deficit spending because Nancy Pelosi issued a ruling here over the last 4 years that there'd be only eggs from free-range hens, and the price went up, and recyclable forks and spoons, those things. So that's going on. There's a political statement being made whenever you eat in the cafeteria. But I think your focus really is to the public employees' pensions and health care. And the public employees' pensions I spoke to a little bit ago, in that I believe that those should be defined contribution plans rather than defined benefit plans. And then they would be stable, and we'd be able to see those benefits be paid out in the states, and also the federal government is closer to a defined contribution plan from my view. But then with the health care that's there, I think you'll know that I have been lined up against this health care plan, and the reason for that is I want to preserve the doctor-patient relationship. I want to preserve the free market component of this and the incentives, and I want to be able to see the research and development move forward. We have, I believe, the best health care system in the world, and I don't want to see it degrade down to that I see in other countries. And so that's where my push is, and I think that is a compassionate, constitutional, fiscally responsible view, and it gives people an opportunity to succeed and an opportunity to choose their own health care rather than have to fit into a government one-size-fits-all, which is the eventuality if this health care policy is implemented fully, and that's designed to happen by 2014. Thank you.
Congressman Steve King of Iowa. A story in the Wall Street Journal today looks at a surge in food stamp use out in the West, and it says there's been a sharp rise since the bottom fell out of the region's boom, and it clashes with the go-it-alone ethos of many Westerners. Reporting from Boise, Jim Carlton says before the recession hit, Idaho, Nevada, and Utah had some of the lowest rates of food stamp use in the nation. It was a boom time in a region that has always prided itself on self-reliance and a disdain for government handouts. But since the recession began, these three states have the fastest growing rates in the nation of participation in the federal program. Recently released figures show. What does this tell you? States not too far away from your own.
Well, that's a surprise to me. It's surprised to me to hear that Idaho would have that kind of a jump in food stamp usage. I haven't heard any reports of that happening around in the Midwest, say in Iowa, for example. And I would want to look at the unemployment rates, the economic growth rates in Idaho, and look back at the food stamp rates and wonder if there isn't some other indicator that's there. And that's a question I'll ask some of the Idaho delegation today. It's curious to me. And I would ask them also, what's the level of immigration into Idaho? Is there a food stamp usage increase that might be coming from an increase of immigration from other states who have different habits in the go-it-alone philosophy?
Let's go to Bear, Delaware, where Lois is on our independent line. Good morning.
Good morning. I have several things that I would like to ask Mr. King. First of all, where are the jobs? When the Republicans were voted in, they said their highest priority were going to be jobs. All you people have done is go for the social pieces of, doing away with Planned Parenthood that helps poor people. You're also, that's really not the head of the nail. You want to go after birth control, and the way it's going, you want to take us back to around the 13th century. As for health care, I'd like to know, Senator, when are you going to when are the Republicans going to hand in their health card? Because if it's not important enough for the American people, it shouldn't be important enough for you to be given health care that we pay for.
Well, Lois, you may not be aware, but you were seeking to put a lot of words in my mouth this morning and representing my position, which isn't accurate. And so I would represent my position this way, that jobs need to come in the private sector, not in government. The growth of this economy is in the private sector. If everybody works for government, who are we going to tax to fund government? And we need that growth in our efficiencies. We need to compete with the rest of the world. We have to have a corporate and a personal income tax rate that allows us to be competitive and that attracts investment capital, because investment capital is what, and the anticipation of profits from that investment capital is what turns it into the jobs. That's what Republicans are doing, and at the same time, we're seeking to reduce regulations so that there's more incentive for people to create more jobs. We don't have jobs without employers, and we don't have employers if they are taxed out of existence or regulated out of existence or discouraged from starting in the first place because of the burden of taxes and regulation. That's where the jobs are. And, if I remember, we swore into this Congress in about the 4th of January of this year. This is the 16th of March, and you're asking me, where are the jobs? Well, Harry Reid's still over in the Senate. President Obama's still in the White House, and we're pushing this chain uphill towards the White House. We'll get there. It's going to take more than 2.5 months to do so. But the Planned Parenthood component of this, there are people in this country by the millions. In fact, this is a majority pro-life nation, and I am among the pro-life people. I believe that it is immoral for us to impose a tax on Americans that gets transferred into the coffers of Planned Parenthood, resulting in abortions. I think the American taxpayers have a legitimate argument about being conscientious objectors, and Planned Parenthood, if they can't function without federal dollars, then they are federally subsidized in other ways as well. So I hope we get to the point where we see whether Planned Parenthood can function in the services that they say beyond the function of abortion itself. Thank you.
Representative Steve King, Republican of Iowa. He was first elected to Congress in 2002. Prior to that, he started and ran King Construction. He started that back in 1975, and his oldest son now runs the construction business. As you look at the cuts that are in H.R. 1, the bill that Republicans passed out of the House, you voted for it. You talked about things you really believe in that are in it, like cuts to Planned Parenthood, cuts to the health care law. Are there any elements of it that you don't like? There's been highlighted attention this week on tsunami warning centers on the West Coast. They took a cut in there. Anything that you'd like to see put back in?
Well, I look across that, the tsunami warning centers, it's really, the timing of that is, really puts attention in the subject matter. I don't know that I would go back and look at that. I would ask people to come forward with the facts on this and how badly do we need them and why, and do the events, the tragic events in Japan, give us a different perspective. I would look at it from a different perspective. I don't know that I would at this point say I'd be willing to try to make that change. I think we often overreact to emergencies, especially natural disasters, before we assess the limit of the damage, and particularly with the nuclear part part of this. I think we need to apply that to the United States and see the difference between where our plants are and where they are in Japan, and how many of our plants are completely out of the range of a tsunami, which was what took the plants out rather than the earthquake itself. But one thing I think we should go back and look at are the cuts to the military. And you look at what has happened since then, and we've got the increasing violence in Libya. We've got liberals calling for some type of intervention in Libya. We've got 8 or 9 different countries in that part of the Middle East that have had some type of unrest or some type of violence within their streets. I think our military needs to be strong, well-equipped, well-funded, well-trained, and very mobile and very nimble. And I think we need to be planning to be able to engage in operations beyond Iraq and Afghanistan, not just fight to hold in one country while we win in another, but be able to operate in 3 or more locations simultaneously. So I'd like to take a look at that. I think there's fat in the Pentagon, but I think that fat should be trimmed out and reallocated within the Department of Defense to make us more mobile and a broader, more effective military.
Deb, Republican caller in Williams County, Ohio. You're on with Congressman King.
Good morning. One thing is the Obamacare. I've talked to a lot of people around here. We're not for it. And another thing is those factories over in Japan that went over there from here, figure out a way to bring them back and rebuild back over here in the United States. I think that'd be a good idea. Deregulation. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Well, thank you. I've spent the last year and a half of my life fighting against Obamacare. The first 6 months of that opposing its passage, and before the sun came up the morning after it passed, drafted the legislation to repeal Obamacare. And I've been fighting on that ever since, including yesterday and starting again today, and that'll happen every day until I see the day that it's completely pulled out of the federal code. So, most of the people that pay attention know where I stand on that. But on the factories that have gone to Japan, Asia, lots of places around the world, we've lost a lot of our industry, and I think America is a country where we need to have a growing and expanding industry. We have to make things here, where jobs are where you make things. And my proposal on that, beyond the tax structure that I talked about briefly, and that's something that could be done within the current environment that we're in, but I have long advocated for the fair tax, going to a national sales tax, abolish the federal income tax code, and actually eliminate the IRS. And in doing so, we'd take the tax off of all productivity in America. Ronald Reagan once said, what you tax, you get less of. Well, the federal government has the first lien on all productivity in America. If you punch the time clock, Uncle Sam is there with his hand out to get his before you get yours. If you have earnings, savings, or investment, they get taxed by the federal government. If you have corporate income, it gets taxed. And all of the income that we have is derived from productivity, and it's all taxed. Well, I want to put it over on consumption, let you earn, save, and invest all you want to earn, save, and invest, and then tax it when you spend the money. And that will lower the prices of the goods we buy because there's an embedded tax in there. And at the same time, give us a 28% marketing advantage for an American car, I'll say a Ford today, priced up against a Japanese-made Mazda. That means we get a 28% advantage, which means American cars go to Japan rather than Japanese cars coming to the United States. And I think that's a subject this Congress should take up, and I'm trying to get that to happen. Thank you.
Congressman Steve King represents Iowa's 5th District. Iowa, always the hot place for presidential politics and national politics in general. Your Conservative Action Conference in Des Moines happens on March 26th, and you guys have confirmed that Governor Haley Barbour will be there, also U.S. House Speaker, former U.S. House Speaker Newt Gingrich, Congressman Michelle Bachmann. Talk to us about the event.
We were looking at this a couple of months ago and decided that the caucus season was starting out slow. Now, the rest of America doesn't think so, but when you live in Iowa, you're used to the rhythm of this, and if presidential candidates don't show up in the local coffee shop, you wonder what's going on. And so as that chat began in January, we decided we want to launch the caucus season, and we looked ahead on the calendar and did a little calculation, picked March 26th, Saturday, Des Moines, Iowa, at the Marriott Hotel, a full day. My PAC, Conservative Principles PAC, is hosting this, and we've invited all the presidential candidates, or the likelies, that are out there, and along with a number of other leading conservative people. We're going to have a full day of leading conservative thinkers and presidential candidates, panels of smart people that'll start in the morning, and then in between the panels we'll have a presidential candidate give their address and alternate that throughout the day. We'll have also Ambassador John Bolton will be there, top-notch foreign policy expert, one who I have great respect for. And to cap it off, Phyllis Schlafly of Eagle Forum is the honorary chair for this. And then we also, in the evening, will be Senator Jim DeMint from South Carolina to cap it off with a keynote address at that evening. So we will have a big day. We have lots of RSVPs. There will be hundreds and hundreds of activists in the hotel, and it's an opportunity for the presidential candidates to help build their organization within the activists, and an opportunity for the activists to evaluate the candidates. It's going to be a very good day on that day. I'm confident we passed the critical mass point in this thing, and it's going to work, and I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a lot of fun.
Also, former Senator Rick Santorum plans to attend. Herman Cain. Why have we not seen an emergence of a leading Republican contender for the presidential election next year? Is it just too early? Do you hope events like this will give voters a chance to really see what people have got to offer as candidates?
Well, that is one of the objects so that this can get started and candidates can start to separate themselves on issues and start to emerge. That's part of the component of it. And at this point, I'm glad that we don't have a leading candidate that can sweep the field, because that would discourage others, and doing so would reduce the number of ideas that we have for an American agenda. But what was taking place is not just looking these candidates over to get behind a single candidate eventually, but this is a matter of sorting out issues, and sorting issues is also setting the priority of the agenda for the next president of the United States, in my view, and helping to set that agenda and punching 2 or 3 tickets to New Hampshire, South Carolina, perhaps Nevada and beyond. They carry that agenda with them. So this is the start of putting the planks in the platform for the presidential election of 2012, along with launching a candidate or maybe 2 or 3 candidates on to New Hampshire. So this is the beginning, and it's about issues and American destiny. And I'm really looking forward to Saturday, the 26th in Des Moines at the Marriott.
Let's hear from Kathy, Democratic caller in New Jersey. Good morning.
Good morning
Kathy.
to the both of you, and thank you for C-SPAN. I have a question about shared sacrifice. I hear a lot of the Republicans talk about shared sacrifice. We all need to share in this. And I'd like to ask, what sacrifice have the wealthy made in this country? They pay an effective tax rate of 16%. I'm in the middle class. I pay 30%. And also, how does reducing personal income taxes create jobs? These tax rates have been in effect not since December, but since 2001 and 2003. And the jobs are still not forthcoming. I don't see how personal income taxes create jobs. Business creates jobs. They have plenty of profits. They pay an effective tax rate of 11%. And still, there are no jobs. Thank you for responding.
Well, thanks, Kathy. First I would say when you use the effective tax rate, I think you have to go back and reassess this. If you apply effective tax rate to corporations or personal, you need to also apply it to your own. And one of the things that I would say, though, about the personal tax rates are that many sole proprietorships are paying a personal income tax. If you're operating a sole proprietorship or a partnership, for example, you're paying the personal income tax rate, but you might be an employer of dozens or even hundreds. And I spent my 28 and a half years in business as a sole proprietor paying a personal income tax rate. And yes, I created jobs, and not a huge company, not in a magnificent way, but I did my part. And I understand how this works. The component about personal income tax rates at 30% versus corporate effective rates at 16%, or the rich, I think is what you said on that one. If you look at other charts, you will see that a number, I'd have to go back and verify this to tell you I know it to be fact, but what lingers in my mind is about the top 4% of the income pays about 50% of the taxes. And if you go on down the line to the top 10%, you've taken care of a far larger percentage of it. But the bottom half don't pay anywhere near a half of the income. And so it's a sliding scale. It's progressive. It taxes the rich a lot higher than it taxes others. And by the way, the lowest income brackets got a 50% tax cut in the extension of the Bush tax brackets. They went from a 15% tax down to a 10% tax. So I think that's some tax relief for the lower income. We should look at the big picture. And additionally, there are 71 different means-tested welfare programs in the United States. And when you add to that rent subsidy, heat subsidy, and a whole list of those programs, there are many subsidies for lower income people that are being utilized. Food stamps is one that Libby brought up earlier today. So that needs to be factored in as part of the income base of people in the lower income. They're not, as all of them, and you may be, but all of them are not living just on the wages. Some of them are also living on the welfare checks and those policies that I've talked about.
Touching on issues of taxes, Newt Gingrich co-authored an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal today called "Make the Bush Tax Cuts Permanent." So he's calling for that. And as you mentioned, Newt Gingrich will be appearing at your Conservative Action Conference in Des Moines later this month. Let's go to Angela, Republican in Savannah, Missouri. Hi, Angela.
Good morning.
Hi, Angela.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, Angela.
Thank you for fighting Obamacare. What is deeply troubling is too many people in this country do not have any clue on the system that's going to come in line when the health care system collapses or when this country becomes bankrupt. I have a question for you, sir. How come the Republicans aren't using this message that $1.1 billion from the stimulus bill was used to create the Federal Coordinating Council for Comparative Effectiveness Research Council, on which Ezekiel Manuel sits? And this man has radical views on denying health care to the elderly, the chronically ill, and the poor. And I want to know why you're not using that message to wake people up.
Okay. Well, that's part of the broader message that I have been driving here, and that is the $105.5 billion in automatic appropriations that are written into Obamacare itself. And I understand that this isn't part of that because it's part of what was left over from the stimulus plan. I have to go back and check that number, but and take a good look at the source. I'm glad you brought it up. I don't think that I could have taught the class on it, nor would I likely have raised the issue. But I've been raising the issue of $105.5 billion, and then there are large transfers that Kathleen Sebelius can use as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Health and Human Services. She can reach into other funds, and some will argue that the definition allows an almost unlimited capacity for her to roll those dollars into the implementation of Obamacare. And I would add to this that, as we talked about facing a potential government shutdown that I argue would be initiated by the Senate and the President, but if that should happen, there's still $23.6 billion already sitting there in the fund to implement Obamacare. And so if there was a government shutdown, the irony of it would be that the federal government workers that would be working would be implementing Obamacare while there was a government shutdown, because the funds are there and the shutdown wouldn't affect that if it should come about. Thank you very much, though. And I'll take a look at that number. And the individual you mentioned I'm not familiar with, and I know I need to follow up on that, too.
Lansing, Michigan, Robert, Independent Line. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Robert.
Why is the Simpson-Bowles debt reduction plan so objectionable to so many people? There was a lot of careful thought and discussion put into that plan, and it should be implemented immediately with very little discussion and no amendments. You just got to do it, and you got to do it now. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There were some bold and hard proposals that were put into Simpson-Bowles. I give them credit for taking that kind of a stand. They're there at the direction and request of the President, and our ears are tuned to the President to see what it is that he would like to lift out of that, a part or all of it, as you recommend. And I listened pretty carefully to the President's State of the Union address and didn't hear a mention of the commission that he had appointed. So I think we turn this back to the President and say, are you going to lead on this? Because if he's not willing to lead on the recommendations of his own commission, then it's pretty hard for members of the House to step up and take parts of that. But it doesn't mean we won't be looking at the ideas, maybe even all of those ideas, as our committees start to move forward. I hope we can get this continuing resolution issue behind us. I hope we can start the functions of the legitimate appropriations process and get our authorizing committees going to work on these kind of issues so that we can prepare the longer term that actually shapes the destiny of America. Right now, we're tied up in this Congress, getting the new 112th Congress functioning in the fashion it needs to. That has to happen first. These issues are not going to go away They will be considered, and I do think, though, that the president needs to lead. It's his commission. Thank you very much.
Hammond, Oregon. Ted joins us on the Democrats line. Hi there.
Good morning. Yes, sir. I'm just kind of wondering. I think back to October 2008 when W. and Mr. Paulson went to the House and Senate for the $787 billion bailout for the Wall Street bankers and the Wall Street stock guys, and I'm just kind of wondering how you voted on that. And I'm wondering, you have a choice of 11 different health plans being a representative, and as a union journeyman plumber, I've always had good teachers. I'm an Air Force veteran, and I just kind of wonder, I've been waiting for one Republican to lead by example. In other words, stand up and say, I've relinquished my government health care, and I'm going to be buying insurance like the rest of the people. But I've yet to hear one person against Obamacare stand up and say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to buy this, and I'm going to lead by example. So I'm just kind of wondering how you think about all this stuff.
We'll leave it there.
Well, first, Ted, thanks for serving America, and I've got my hands dirty a little bit doing some real work, too, and I respect all of everybody that makes this country work the way you have. The point that you made about bailing out Wall Street, and when Secretary Paulson came to the Capitol in the fall of 2008, I remember September, but it was in the fall. And I thought that Henry Paulson had his Chicken Little day, that he said the sky is falling and it might fall anyway, but the only way we can keep it from falling is give me $700 billion and don't put any strings attached to it. I voted no. I spoke no on it. I worked against it. I think it was a mistake to do that. It did bail out the Wall Street bankers. If you look how well they've been doing, it's been really good over the last couple of years. And I think the plan was designed to protect them, and somehow the top down was going to flow to everybody else. I had a whole different series of plans. I introduced legislation. I won't burn all the time this morning explaining all of that, but I look back on that, and I think everything I proposed then holds up today as more reasonable, more prudent, more fiscally responsible, with a better result that we would have had if we'd have had those things implemented. That legislation lays out there. But we have had one member of Congress that has refused to accept the health care policy. It's a young member from Illinois, and I don't want to quite say their name because I'm not sure which it is, but I know we've had one that stepped up to do that, and hopefully we'll be able to get that name and let you know. Thanks a lot.
Congressman Steve King represents Iowa's 5th District. Thank you so much for being with us here this morning.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this morning, and I appreciate the privilege to be here.
Coming up next, we'll talk about nuclear safety in the United States. We'll be right back.
You're watching C-SPAN, bringing you politics and public affairs. Every morning, it's Washington Journal, our live call-in program about the news of the day, connecting you with elected officials, policymakers, and journalists. Weekdays, watch live coverage of the U.S. House, and weeknights, congressional hearings and policy forums. Also, Supreme Court oral arguments. On the weekends, you can see our signature interview programs. On Saturdays, The Communicators. And on Sundays, Newsmakers, Q&A, and Prime Minister's questions from the British House of Commons. You can also watch our programming anytime at cspan.org, and it's all searchable at our C-SPAN video library. C-SPAN, Washington your way. A public service created by America's cable companies.